and that's the point, right? Is that it's intergovernmental. Like
Yeah.
it's not just the British government is lying about climate change. It has to be all the governments involved in this massive thing are involved in this, and they all know that it's false, and they're all pushing. So it just, when you examine it like that, it just becomes nonsense, really.
There's a lot of crazy conspiracy stuff that's in the dark places of the internet, but climate change is the one that's really being pushed onto mainstream media, isn't it? I think that's the one that's really, really dangerous, where Talk TV, GB News, mainline medias are
Yeah.
damning climate change.
And there's a reason for that. I mean, if I could recommend one thing that everyone goes to and listens to after this, is a series by the BBC called How They Made Us Doubt Everything. And this basically talks about, it starts with the tobacco industry, and how they, basically wrote the playbook on science denial, when it became apparent that smoking caused cancer, but basically how Exxon took that same playbook in the 60s. It might have even been the 50s when the Exxon scientists were the first ones to figure out that burning fossil fuels would lead to climate change a long time ago. And Exxon basically took the playbook that the tobacco companies had used and used that as a platform. So it's sad, but it's nothing new. And
yeah, I mean, this is the thing for me, because this just seems so obvious what's going on. This was one of the conversations that I was having with these climate change deniers, where they're flipping it the other way round. They're trying to say that big business are trying to push this climate change stuff, so we go to renewables and make money there, and governments make money. But where it's so obviously the other way round, where the majority of scientists agree that climate change is a problem, and there's a few scientists that are obviously being paid to do studies by these oil companies and Rupert Murdoch's and pumping this crap into GB News and Talk Radio and Fox. Is that a conspiracy theory to most? Because that just seems obvious to me what's going on. But to them, what I just said is a conspiracy theory. Like you said, it's
it is technically a theory about a conspiracy, but the difference is that we have, with the Exxon thing, for example, we have all the evidence of that, like all the the letters and all those physical evidence to prove all this. When it comes to the other way around, they always have to take these indirect routes to get to the point, and that's one of the ways, because there are real conspiracies, right? There's nothing wrong with believing that conspiracies happen.
Sure.
There's a really interesting paper that I read about this, where you can kind of analyze the difference between a real conspiracy and a fake conspiracy theory, for example, in this case, and there's certain characteristics you can look out for, and one of the main ones, that's kind of easy, is how many people have to be involved. That's the in a real conspiracy, in the Exxon case, that was Exxon suppressing that information. It's one company who figured it out first and then realized, we should probably get ahead of the curve on this. And then later other people get involved. But you know what I mean? It started from a single company. Whereas for this, like you said, for this to be believed and you got called out that this was somehow a straw man, which I don't believe that it was. But the idea that if not all scientists, a significant amount need to be on the payroll. As someone who works in evolution, we always get this joke, like, where's my cut? But the amount of people to be involved has to be huge. I mean, people will profit from green energy. That's just a fact. But it's being done in the open. It's not. If it's a conspiracy, it's not a very good one. They won't tell people. Government branding is to say invest in renewable and you will make money. You don't encourage private investors to invest in something if you don't think they're going to make money out of it.
That's so true what you said. This was the point that I was trying to get across really, the amount of people that are involved in the conspiracy for climate change. And like you said, he called me out for a straw man argument because he was saying that the scientists are being paid off to give this information. And I said, well, as Professor Brian Cox, as Neil deGrasse Tyson, of all these people, are they all paid off? Is everyone paid off? It's so huge. It just falls apart. But I just,
And I mean,
I
how many
find,
people are on the IPCC report? It's like an insane. Like, I mean, you're naming famous people, right? Because they're communicators.
because
but
that's,
like,
people know these people. Yeah.
the IPCC, is it IPCC? I always get it wrong. IPPC. No, that's wrong. IPCC. Yeah, they have thousands and thousands of members. You know, it's not just
So explain
how it
what
works.
this is, the IPCC.
Oh, sorry, that's the I've got it here. The international, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. They're the ones who publish these big reports, and that's the point, right? Is that it's intergovernmental. Like it's not just the British government is lying about climate change. It has to be all the governments involved in this massive thing are involved in this, and they all know that it's false, and they're all pushing. You know, so it just, when you examine it like that, it just becomes nonsense, really.
Yeah. See, I get the motivation for business to push this agenda for money. I get the motivation for some politicians to push this anti-climate change stuff if they're being paid by big business. I get their motivations. But what I find so strange is the normal man on the street that laps this stuff up and loves it and wants to spread it on the internet. And I kind of get this thing that people love when they disprove something really, really big. You know, if someone say, oh, you know, these electric cars, they're actually worse for the environment than fuel cars. And people go, oh, what, really? Yeah. And I think people like get this buzz out of proving established things, established
Sure, and I don't judge them
institutions.
for it. I mean, I have that particular part in my personality as well. You know, it's good to be right. You know, and it's also good to, you know, if you're a contrarian, you know, it's good to, you know, be one of the few people who are correct about something.
Yeah, well, I mean, I guess that is science, isn't it? You have to prove things wrong. You know.
Yeah, I mean, this is the thing with climate change is that, you know, for example, I mean, it's maybe a bad example because the data that exists is just, there's so much of it out there. But, you know, if you can prove an established idea wrong, like that's not a bad thing. Like, no, you know, if you can prove it, you'll be asked for a greater burden of evidence because, you know, what's the term? Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. So if you want to challenge the status quo, there is, I think, understandably, a higher expectation, you know, a higher burden of evidence on, you know, because you're going against everything before. But if you can do that, like you'll be, you know, your career is made. If you know what I mean? If you shift the paradigm, that's like every scientist's dream is to
of course,
discover something that is, you know, is new or incorrect, you know, because, you know, then you can be the guy that corrected it, you know, and for the, you know, you'll have talks for the rest of your life about, you know, as I said, it's a fantasy of scientists to achieve that. So the idea that we're just going along and accepting what everyone says, you know, it's not a perfect system. I don't want to bore you with the kind of ins and outs of peer review and all these things, but it's not perfect, but it exists and it works, you know, it well enough.
But yeah, that's what these guys were saying, though. Basically, I don't want to hang on these guys' opinions too long, but they're saying that there are scientists out there that are disproving climate change and fossil fuels creating climate change, but they're being silenced. They're being, I mean, what do you say to that? I don't know what to make of that information, really. I mean,
I don't know. Last time we talked about like woke stuff as well, right? And and maybe you can weigh in on this, but a lot of people who are saying that they're being silenced, like, I'm still hearing about them. It's the same
Yeah.
thing. Like, people who have been cancelled. J.K. Rowling has been cancelled. No, she hasn't. Like, she's everywhere. Like, I can't avoid. I don't care about what she has to say, and I can't avoid hearing about. Yeah, and it's the same with this, right? Like, it's the same with the anti-vaxxers. What's his name? Andrew Bridgen, for example, has been in Parliament over the past week. Spreading all kinds of stuff about vaccines. Like, they're not, like, if they're being silenced, they're not being silenced very well.
No.